The old woman's name was Grace Miller, 78 years old, living quietly in a small house she had owned for 4 decades. That morning, as she sat at her kitchen table with trembling fingers around a cold cup of coffee, she realized her phone had gone dead without warning. There was no dial tone, no ring, only a heavy silence that made her breath tighten. She whispered, "This isn't normal," but the empty kitchen did not answer. Grace knew accidents happened, but she also knew intention when she felt it. And deep in her chest, something clicked cold and slow, telling her someone had done this on purpose. She tried to ignore the fear growing in her stomach, but when her debit card was declined at the grocery store, a 78-year-old woman buying nothing but bread and tea, her heart dropped. The cashier whispered, "Ma'am, it says insufficient funds," and Grace felt her cheeks burn. An hour later, her internet went out, not flickering, not glitching, but simply gone. She stood in her living room whispering, 3 cuts in 1 day, as the walls seemed to lean in. Grace had worked her whole life as a clinic nurse. She raised her son here. She buried her husband here. She paid every bill on time. Nothing about this was an accident. At 3:12 p.m., her son David walked in without knocking, and his wife Emma followed with sharp heels clicking on the hardwood floor. Grace did not stand. Age had taught her the power of staying seated. "What happened to my phone?" she asked calmly. David sighed like a man tired of explaining basics to a stubborn child. "We turned off the plan, Mom. You don't need all that technology." Grace stared at him. "It worked fine yesterday." But Emma slid a folder onto the table and said, "We're simplifying things. You've been struggling." Grace answered with quiet steel, "I haven't struggled with anything." David leaned forward, voice flat. "Your card is paused for now. We're consolidating your accounts. You'll get a weekly allowance, and we'll manage the rest." Grace kept her hands folded to hide the shaking. "Allowance?" she repeated softly. Emma nodded with a pitying smile. "It's for your safety. Older people fall for scams." Grace's eyes narrowed. "And the internet?" Emma shrugged. "It was too risky for you." The words "for your own good" floated between them like a trap. Grace looked at her son and said quietly, "David, give me back my accounts." He shook his head. "No. It's already done." They thought the conversation was finished, but Grace watched them with a stillness they mistook for defeat. When they left, the door closed with a confidence that stung. On the table, Emma's folder waited like a quiet threat. Grace opened it slowly, breath unsteady, and froze. Her signature, large, messy, wrong, was printed on every page. She whispered, "I never signed this." The forged loops, the uneven pressure, the rushed strokes, they were not hers. That was the moment her fear hardened into something sharper. "So this is what they think of me," she said softly. "Good. Now I know exactly what I'm fighting." Grace did not sleep that night. She sat in her kitchen with a blanket around her shoulders, watching the forged papers lying under the yellow lamp. Every time she looked at her own false signature, something inside her tightened. At dawn, the mailbox clattered, making her jump. She shuffled outside and returned with a notice from her insurance company, another update she had never requested. "They're building a net," she whispered. She took her neighbor's phone, dialed the bank, and said, "This is Grace Miller. I need to report unauthorized changes to my account." Her voice was steady, sharper than she expected. At the bank, a young manager named Helen invited Grace into her office with a careful, respectful tone. She laid the forged documents on the desk and asked, "Is this your signature, Mrs. Miller?" Grace shook her head slowly. "No. I haven't signed anything in months." Helen's eyebrows rose. "Then we must freeze all pending changes immediately." She typed quickly, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Someone filed for financial guardianship in your name," she added. Grace's breath caught. "Is it finalized?" she asked. Helen shook her head. "Not yet. But they filed the intent." Grace whispered, "Then they almost succeeded." When Grace left the bank, she felt the winter wind push against her coat, but instead of weakening her, it steadied her. Halfway home, her phone vibrated for the first time since yesterday. A message appeared, "Service restored. Please contact administrator." Administrator. Not son. Not family. Not her. Grace stared at the glowing screen. So they're still trying to manage me, she murmured. But instead of fear, she felt something else rising, clarity. She clutched the bank folder tightly, knowing she now had proof. The moment she reached her front porch, her jaw tightened with resolve. This was far from over. 10 minutes after she entered her house, the doorbell rang sharply. Grace didn't need to look through the peephole. Only David rang a bell like it owed him money. He pushed in as soon as she opened the door. "Mom, what did you do at the bank?" he snapped. Grace closed the door calmly. "I corrected your mistake." David's eyes darted to the bank folder. "You froze the accounts. You made everything harder." She poured herself tea and said, "You forged my signature, David." His jaw tensed. He didn't deny it. He just whispered, "It was only paperwork. We were trying to help you." Grace set her cup down gently, letting the steam rise between them. "Help?" she asked. "You took my phone, my money, my access. You filed for guardianship without telling me." David paced like a trapped man, rubbing his thinning hair. "You've been slipping," he argued. She shook her head. "No, David. I've been patient." She opened a drawer and placed 2 decades of receipts and statements on the table. "This is 20 years of me helping you." Then she tapped the forged signature with a steady finger. "And this is how you repay me." For the first time, David looked truly small. David stood there breathing hard, the way a man breathes when he realizes he has been caught without an excuse prepared. Grace did not raise her voice. She simply held his gaze. "You should have asked," she said. "Not stolen." He looked away, kicking at the leg of a chair. "Things are hard for us right now," he muttered. "Bills, repairs, car payments. You don't understand." Grace answered softly, "Then ask for help like a son, not like a thief." The words hit him like a cold splash. For the first time, he didn't argue. He only stared at his shoes. The door closed behind him with a hollow thud, and Grace stood alone among the documents, the lies, and the truth she had gathered. She took a long breath, her fingers brushing across the forged papers with a steadiness she had earned through decades of discipline. "This is evidence," she whispered. She began sorting every record into 2 new piles, truth and betrayal, watching the betrayal stack grow heavy. She wasn't doing this out of spite. She was doing it because she finally understood something important. If she didn't protect herself now, no one would. And she still valued her life. A soft knock echoed on the door, nothing like David's pounding. Grace opened it to find Lily, her granddaughter, a kind-eyed young woman who looked both scared and relieved. "Grandma," Lily asked, "Dad's been calling everyone. What happened?" Grace led her inside and guided her to the kitchen. Lily's eyes widened at the papers spread across the table. "Grandma, is all this real?" Grace nodded. "Your father tried to take everything." Lily sank into a chair. "He mentioned assisted living." Grace said gently, "They wanted me silent. They wanted me placed somewhere. But I'm still here." Lily reached across the table and squeezed her grandmother's hand. "Tell me how I can help," she said. Grace studied her face carefully. She saw no greed there, no hunger for control, only genuine concern. "You help by being honest," Grace said. "And by remembering what you saw today." Lily nodded, eyes shining. "I won't let anyone treat you like this." Grace smiled softly. "I know." Lily stayed for an hour, listening, asking questions, offering comfort. When she finally left, Grace felt lighter. Not because the problem was solved, but because now she knew she wasn't fighting alone. A car rolled into the driveway just after Lily left. Grace peered through the window and saw a neatly dressed woman stepping out with a clipboard. A care coordinator, clearly sent by David or Emma. The doorbell chimed politely. "Mrs. Miller," the woman said, "I'm Megan from Brookside Support. Your family asked me to check in." Grace stood firm in the doorway. "Did they tell you I'm confused?" she asked. Megan hesitated. "They mentioned difficulties managing finances." Grace pointed toward the organized, carefully labeled folders on the table. "Do I look confused to you?" Megan's professional mask cracked. "No," she admitted. Grace invited her just far enough inside for her to see the truth. Megan examined the documents, her expression darkening as she read the forged signatures. "This is serious," she said. Grace nodded. My son assumed I wouldn't notice. Megan gently closed the folder. I'll document everything. And I'll write that you demonstrated full capacity. Grace lifted her chin. Do that. I want no more surprise evaluations. Megan gave her a quiet, sincere nod. If they push again, call me. When she left, Grace locked the door, not from fear but from intention. Her house was hers again. The next day, Grace woke earlier than usual. Her mind felt clear, sharpened by purpose. She gathered the forged papers, the bank records, and the notes she had written about every call. She placed them in a leather bag she hadn't used in years. By mid-morning, she was walking to the modest law office down the street. Mr. Carter, a calm, sharp-eyed attorney, listened to her story without interruption. When she finished, he tapped the papers lightly. You have enough evidence to block any guardianship attempt, he said. Grace breathed out slowly. Then help me protect myself. He smiled. Gladly. Mr. Carter drafted new protection documents, granting Grace full legal autonomy and appointing an independent advocate for her finances, someone outside the family. This places a wall between you and anyone trying to interfere, he explained. Grace signed with hands that no longer trembled. What happens now? She asked. He leaned back. Now if they push, they fail. And you stay in control. For the first time in days, Grace felt something warm spreading through her chest. Not victory, just steadiness, the kind a person feels when the ground beneath them finally stops shaking. When Grace returned home, her phone buzzed with tension. David had called 6 times. Emma 4. Even Lily had tried twice. But Grace let every call ring out. Not out of anger, but because she was choosing silence for once, not as surrender, but as power. By evening, she listened to one voicemail from David. His voice sounded clipped. Mom, this is getting out of hand. You're making things harder for everyone. Call me back. Grace set the phone down. They're feeling the consequences, she murmured. Good. Now they know I'm not invisible. Just as she prepared tea, headlights swept across her porch. David again. His footsteps thundered toward the door, but this time, when he turned the knob, it didn't budge. Grace had changed the locks. He pounded hard. Mom. Open up. We need to talk. Grace walked to the door, but didn't open it. Not like this, David, she said through the wood. You don't get to storm in anymore. He rattled the handle. You're ruining everything. Grace answered softly, I'm saving myself. He cursed under his breath and stomped away. Grace stood still, letting the silence settle like a shield around her. The next morning rose with a pale gray sky, the kind that felt like the world was holding its breath. Grace sat at her table with a cup of tea, but her mind was not on the warmth. It was on the knowledge that David and Emma would not give up easily. People who grew comfortable taking from others rarely stopped on the first pushback. Her phone buzzed again, another attempt from David, but she let it ring. Instead, she picked up her notebook and wrote the date at the top. Then she listed every call, every visit, every threat. Paper doesn't forget, she whispered. By mid-morning, Grace dressed in her navy cardigan and walked to her doctor's clinic. Not because she felt weak, but because she needed one more piece of armor. The nurse greeted her warmly. Grace, what brings you in today? Grace answered plainly, I want a full medical evaluation. Cognitive, physical, all of it. The doctor conducted every test with patient care. When he finished, he smiled. Grace, you're sharper than most people 20 years younger. She nodded once. Put that in writing. He did. Grace left with a document that turned the lie of slipping into dust. Back home, Grace placed the medical report on the truth pile. The stack now felt heavier than betrayal, and that meant something. As she organized the papers, her phone buzzed again, not with a call, but with a message from Lily. Dad's quiet today. He's angry, but also scared. Are you okay? Grace typed back, I'm fine. Don't carry his fear. It's not yours. Lily replied with a single heart. Grace set the phone down gently. She didn't want Lily trapped between love and loyalty. She wanted her free. And today, for the first time, Grace felt free herself. Late in the afternoon, Grace heard a familiar car roll into her driveway. Emma's voice floated in from outside, sharp and uneasy. Grace opened the door just enough to see her standing there with tight lips and cold eyes. "Grace," Emma began, "we need to talk about these changes. You froze everything. You put us in a difficult position." Grace answered calmly, "Your difficulty is not my responsibility." Emma blinked hard. "You're punishing us." Grace shook her head. "No, Emma. I'm protecting myself." Emma's cheeks reddened. "If you don't undo this, we'll take other steps." Grace replied softly, "So will I." When Emma left in frustration, Grace returned to the living room and sat in her armchair. The house felt different now, not a battlefield, but a place reclaiming its quiet strength. She traced her fingers along the armrest, remembering her husband's words, "Grace, keep your papers where you can find them." At the time she had laughed, thinking it was about bills and receipts. Now she saw the deeper truth. He had known life could turn sharp without warning. Grace whispered to the empty room, "I'm ready now. Truly ready." Her voice did not tremble. It carried. The following morning, Grace woke before the sun. She ate breakfast slowly, forcing herself to keep her strength. At 9:30, her phone buzzed again, this time from the care coordinator Megan. "Grace," Megan said, "your son contacted our office again. He insisted on an emergency evaluation." Grace sighed softly. "And what did you tell him?" Megan replied, "We declined it. Your file already states you are fully capable." Grace nodded, even though Megan could not see her. "Thank you." Megan hesitated. "Do you expect more pressure?" Grace answered, "Yes. But I am prepared for all of it." After the call, Grace walked to the window and watched the winter light settle over her yard. A kind of stillness moved through her, not fear, not relief, something steadier. She picked up the trust documents she had drafted with Mr. Carter. Today she would finalize them. Today she would choose who deserved her legacy, her home, and the life she had built. She whispered, "Lily." The name felt right. Kindness deserved something lasting. Grace packed the papers, took her coat, and stepped outside. The cold air met her like a reminder, she still had choices. At the law office, Mr. Carter greeted her with a respectful nod. "Ready to sign?" he asked. Grace nodded. The process was slow but sure. Together, they read through each page, the trust, the protections, the beneficiary decisions. Grace signed with steady hands. When they finished, Mr. Carter said, "This secures your future. No one can override it." Grace closed the folder gently. "Good. I'm tired of being afraid." He gave her a soft, encouraging smile. "You're not a victim, Grace. You're ahead of them now." She smiled back. Finally. Grace walked home with steady steps, carrying the documents that protected her life. Halfway up the porch steps, she saw someone sitting on the rail, David. Not angry this time, not storming, just tired. He stood when he saw her. "Mom," he said quietly. I need to apologize." Grace studied him. The sharpness in his eyes was gone. The fight was gone too. Only a worn-down honesty remained. "Come in," she said softly. They entered the living room and sat in their usual chairs, the space between them still heavy, but no longer dangerous. David rubbed his face with both hands. "I didn't think it would go this far," he said. "I thought you'd let us handle things like before." Grace answered gently, "That was the problem, David. You wanted control, not communication." He swallowed hard. "I was scared. About money. About failing. It felt easier to lean on you." Grace nodded slowly. "But easier for you was destroying me." He looked at her with damp eyes. "Mom, will you ever forgive me?" Grace breathed deeply. "I already have. But forgiveness doesn't erase boundaries. Those stay." David nodded weakly. "I understand." The house felt strangely warm after David left, as if the walls themselves had exhaled. Grace walked slowly to the kitchen, poured herself a fresh cup of tea, and let her thoughts settle like dust in sunlight. She had not won through shouting or fear. She had won through steadiness. Through truth. Through refusing to disappear. As she sat at the table, she whispered, "I'm still here." And for the first time in a long while, those words didn't feel defensive. They felt like a declaration. A reminder to herself that her life still belonged to her. The next morning was calm. No pounding on the door. No surprise calls. Grace moved through her home with a quiet purpose. She cleaned the living room, folded laundry, opened her curtains, and let the winter light spill across the floor. The phone buzzed once, Lily checking in again. "Are you okay, Grandma?" Grace replied, "Yes, sweetheart. Today is peaceful." Lily sent back another heart. Grace smiled softly. She did not want the young woman caught in the storm. She wanted her safe, hopeful, and free from the family shadows that had grown too long. After lunch, Grace took out the newly signed trust folder and reviewed everything with slow, careful breaths. Her home, her savings, her small investments, every piece of her life's work, was now protected. David and Emma could no longer touch any of it. She ran a hand over Lily's name. "This is for the one who stood by me," she said quietly. Not out of revenge. Not to punish her son. But because kindness deserved something lasting, and Lily had shown her kindness when everyone else had shown her control. It felt right. It felt clean. By late afternoon, the doorbell rang softly. Grace opened it to find Lily standing there, cheeks pink from the cold. "Grandma," she said, "I just wanted to see you." Grace let her inside and made tea for two. Lily sat at the table and looked around with a relieved smile. "It feels different in here," she said. Grace nodded. "It is different." Lily lowered her voice. "Dad's been quieter. He's thinking a lot." Grace sighed gently. "Good. Thought is the beginning of change." Lily reached for her hand. "I'm proud of you, Grandma." Grace squeezed her fingers. "And I'm proud of you." The two of them talked for nearly an hour, about life, about mistakes, about forgiveness and boundaries. Grace told Lily, "Love is not the same as permission. You can love people and still refuse to let them hurt you." Lily nodded slowly. "I wish Dad understood that." Grace smiled softly. "He's learning. Slowly, but learning." When Lily left, she hugged her tightly, the kind of hug that leaves warmth behind even when the door closes. Grace stood a moment longer in the quiet hallway, feeling gratitude rise inside her like steady light. Evening settled gently across the house. Grace turned on a single lamp and sat with her tea. Her hands no longer shook the way they had days ago. She felt anchored now, rooted not in her age but in her choices. She heard her husband's voice in memory, soft and steady, "Grace, you're stronger than you think." She whispered, "I believe that now." The room felt peaceful, not because everything was perfect, but because she had claimed her place in it again. She had reclaimed herself. And that was a victory no one could take away. The following morning, Grace stepped onto her porch just as the cold air brushed her face. A car slowed near her driveway. For a moment, she feared David had come to argue again. But instead, he rolled down the window and gave her a small, unsure wave. "Morning, Mom," he said. She nodded gently. "Morning." He hesitated, then added, I'm working on things." Grace studied his face. Something genuine lived in his expression now. Not entitlement. Not anger. Just the fragile start of humility. "Good," she said. "Fixing yourself is your work, not mine." David nodded, eyes damp. "I know," he whispered. "And I'm sorry again." Grace gave him a calm, steady look. "I accept your apology," she said. "But understand, my decisions still stand." He nodded slowly. "I'm not asking you to change them. I just want to do better." Grace felt a soft ache in her chest. The ache of hope. "Then do better," she said simply. He managed a small smile before driving off. Grace stayed on the porch a moment longer, letting the cold morning settle around her. It didn't feel harsh today. It felt honest. Inside, she made one last cup of tea and carried it to her favorite chair. She looked at the trust papers, the medical report, the bank documents, all of them symbols of a battle she never expected to fight at 78. She didn't feel victorious in a loud way. She felt restored. She felt seen by herself again. She whispered, "I didn't lose myself. Not this time." The truth was simple. She had learned how powerful a quiet voice could be when it refused to bend. And that lesson had saved her. As the sun set behind the trees, Grace looked around her home, the house she'd built, protected, and fought for. Everything felt steady again, not because life had spared her hardship, but because she no longer stood silently inside it. She had spoken. She had acted. She had reclaimed her dignity. And now, the rest of her days belonged to her and her alone. She lifted her tea and whispered to anyone who had ever felt small, "Start today. Start quietly. But start." Then she smiled, knowing she had chosen her own ending, and chosen it well. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me your thoughts in the comments below. I love reading your reactions.